All right, so today we're going to dive deep into the life of Carlos Santana.
Okay.
But we're going beyond just the music.
Yeah.
We're looking at the man behind all those iconic guitar riffs.
Yeah.
The source material we've got paints this picture that's really quite fascinating. Almost a contradiction, you could say.
Interesting.
You've got this incredibly joyful and spiritually uplifting music
Right.
paired with a life that's been marked by some pretty intense hardship and struggles.
It's true.
Yeah.
Santana's story is...
But how do those two things even coexist?
Yeah, it's full of these stark contrasts.
Right.
And that's what makes it so compelling to me.
Right.
I mean, you can't really understand the music without understanding the man.
Absolutely. And one of the things that just jumped out at me right away was his childhood.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a tough start.
Definitely.
The source material describes his early years in Tijuana as almost Dickensian.
It really was. His family moved there when he was just a little boy, like 7 years old.
Wow.
And they were living in deep poverty.
Wow.
His dad had him and his brothers out working, trying to make ends meet any way they could.
Like doing what?
Selling gum on the streets, shining shoes.
Oh, my gosh.
That's a pretty harsh reality for a young kid.
That's awful.
Yeah.
And it gets even more intense.
Oh, yeah.
The source mentions that by the time Santana was 14,
14 years old.
he was actually playing music in strip clubs.
That's right.
14.
Now, obviously,
I'd imagine.
that kind of environment isn't ideal for a teenager.
No, not at all.
But it does speak to his incredible drive.
I mean, got to be resourceful.
And resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Even in those circumstances, he was finding a way to use his music to carve out a path for himself.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what kind of impact that had on him.
Absolutely.
Both musically and personally.
For sure.
To be exposed to that world at such a young age.
Right.
I mean.
And unfortunately, the source goes on to describe another dark chapter from his childhood.
What's that?
Abuse.
Oh, gosh.
He was targeted by this American man
who
would give him gifts, take him to the U.S., and then, abuse him.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And when you read Santana's own words about it,
right,
the pain is just palpable.
Yeah.
He talks about finally realizing that this man was a very sick person.
It's a reminder that behind the music,
behind the persona,
behind the fame, there's a real human being who has experienced some very real trauma.
For sure.
And it's something he carried with him for a long time.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And then even within his own family, there was a lot of turmoil.
Oh, yeah. A lot of chaos.
He actually saved up a bunch of money for immigration papers.
Wow.
Only to find out his mother had used it for his sister's dental work.
Imagine working so hard.
Oh, my God.
Sacrificing so much only to have that dream snatched away. It must have been just a crushing blow.
I can't imagine.
Especially for a young man who was already facing so many challenges.
Yeah.
Right?
And it didn't end there.
Oh, no.
He had a bit of money left.
Right.
Was planning to buy a guitar. And his mom used that for rent.
Oh, wow.
He was so angry.
Yeah, I bet.
He ran away back to Tijuana, back to the clubs.
Oh, wow.
Then his family basically kidnapped him back. It sounds like a really chaotic period.
Absolutely.
Just a lot of instability.
And that feeling of being uprooted, of not having a stable foundation.
Right.
It must have been incredibly difficult for him at that age.
I bet.
Especially when you consider the cultural shift he was experiencing, moving from Tijuana to San Francisco.
Huge change.
Yeah, huge adjustment.
But then in the midst of all this chaos, his music career starts to take off.
Yeah.
Talk about a whirlwind.
Yeah.
The source describes him going from busking on the streets to opening for The Who.
Wow.
While he was still in high school.
Talk about raw talent.
I know, it's crazy.
To be recognized at that level with everything else going on in his life.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary.
It really is.
It really speaks volumes about his dedication to his craft.
For sure.
Yeah.
But just as things were looking up, he gets hit with another major setback.
Oh, no. What happened?
At 19, he's diagnosed with tuberculosis.
Wow.
And the source even mentions how he had to get penicillin shots in his rear end because he couldn't handle the oral medication.
Oh, God.
It's hard to imagine going through something that intense while you're on the cusp of stardom.
It really speaks to his incredible fortitude.
I mean, he must have been so strong to go through all that.
The fact that he graduated high school while hospitalized and didn't let this illness derail his dreams.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
That's true.
And of course, those early Santana albums just took the world by storm.
Oh, yeah.
That fusion of Latin rhythms, jazz, psychedelic rock.
It was nothing like it.
It was something completely fresh,
Yeah.
and it resonated with people on a deep level.
Yeah, totally. Santana Braxis, Santana III.
Huge hits.
Those albums were massive hits.
Yeah.
But then as his fame grew,
Okay.
there started to be some creative friction.
Oh, really?
The source talks about this album, Caravanserai,
Okay.
which was a pretty big departure from his earlier sound.
How so?
It was more experimental
Okay.
with a lot less vocals.
Interesting.
And apparently, Clive Davis,
The record
the
executive?
record executive at the time, practically told Santana it would ruin his career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of the tension
Right.
between artistic vision and commercial expectations.
Right.
It happens all the time,
It does.
especially with artists who are pushing boundaries
Yeah.
and trying to evolve their sound.
Absolutely.
But what's interesting is that Santana didn't back down.
No, he didn't.
He believed in this music, even if it meant taking a risk.
He stuck to his guns. And it did pay off, right?
It did.
Their events ended up being a top 10 hit.
Wow.
But then just a couple years later,
Okay.
he clashes with Davis again
Uh-oh.
over this live album called Lotus.
A 3 LP set.
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine trying to release something like that today?
No.
It just goes to
The
show
industry was different.
how different the music industry was back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And to make things even more frustrating,
Okay.
Columbia Records only released Lotus in Japan.
Oh, wow.
That must have been a huge blow to Santana,
Yeah.
feeling like his artistic vision was being stifled.
It really highlights the power dynamics at play in the music industry
Yeah, for sure.
and how an artist's creative freedom
Right.
can sometimes be compromised by commercial interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And sadly, it seems like that marked the beginning of a downward trend for him.
Really?
The source explains that Columbia ended up dropping him
Oh, wow.
after his album Spirits Dancing in the Flesh. And that was his third album in a row
Okay.
that didn't go gold or platinum.
Wow.
He signs with Polydor,
Okay.
releases Milagro,
Mm-hmm.
and that one flops too.
This is where I think we start to see the real emotional toll
Yeah,
these setbacks can have on an artist.
of course.
You go from being on top of the world
Yeah.
to struggling to even get a record deal.
That's gotta be hard.
It's a harsh reality check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, his father passes away in 1997.
Oh, God.
The source says he was completely devastated.
Yeah.
Couldn't even listen to music for a while.
I can imagine.
It sounds like it was a really dark period for him.
It's heartbreaking, really, to
Yeah.
lose your father,
Right.
especially when you're already dealing with so much professionally.
Yeah,
It can be incredibly difficult to cope.
of course.
It's no wonder he retreated from music for a while.
Right. But then, out of the darkness,
Okay.
comes this incredible comeback story.
What's that?
Supernatural.
Oh, absolutely.
The album,
That album is one of the most remarkable comebacks in music history, wouldn't you say?
definitely.
Yeah.
He teams up with Clive Davis again,
Wow, really?
who's at Arista Records by this point.
Okay.
And they create this album that blends Santana's classic sound
Okay.
with collaborations from all these younger artists.
Interesting.
It was such a smart move, both musically and commercially.
It really was.
Yeah.
It brought him back to the forefront,
It did.
introduced him to a whole new generation of fans,
Absolutely.
and proved that he could still create music
Yeah.
that was both relevant and groundbreaking.
Yeah. And the success was undeniable.
Huge.
Supernatural sold 13 million copies,
Wow.
won 8 Grammy Awards.
That's incredible.
It was a complete vindication.
Resilience personified, truly.
Yeah.
It shows how Santana was able to adapt
Right.
to stay true to his vision while also evolving and
Yeah.
connecting with new audiences.
Right.
And I think that ability to reinvent himself is a big part of why he's remained such an iconic figure in music.
That's true.
Yeah. It really does make you hear the music differently, doesn't it?
Totally.
Knowing the depth of what he was experiencing
Yeah.
while creating some of those iconic songs.
Like when you hear Black Magic Woman or Oye Como Va,
Right.
there's this undeniable joy,
Yeah.
the energy that just bursts through.
Uh-huh.
But now knowing about the abuse, the poverty, the family struggles,
Yeah.
it's like you're hearing those songs with new ears.
It's almost as if he was transmuting that pain
Right.
into something beautiful.
Yeah.
Something that could connect with people on a deeper, almost spiritual level.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
The source also talks about his relationship with his father.
Okay.
It mentions how they used to play music together in those rough Tijuana bars when he was just a kid.
Oh, wow.
Do you think that had an influence on his music?
Oh, for sure.
Even if it wasn't the most positive environment?
It's hard to imagine it didn't. Our early experiences shape us in profound ways,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to art.
Right.
The sounds, the rhythms he was exposed to in those bars.
Yeah.
They became part of his musical DNA,
Interesting.
for better or for worse.
Right.
And it's important to remember
What's that?
that his father was a musician too.
Oh, that's right.
There's a lineage there,
Huh?
a passing down of tradition
Yeah.
that Santana both embraced and rebelled against.
That's interesting
Yeah.
because the source describes him pushing back against that tradition when his family moved to San Francisco.
Okay.
He didn't want to go. He was angry.
Wow.
Even refused to eat for a while.
Really?
It was like he was rejecting everything his family represented.
Adolescence is a time of upheaval for most people.
Yeah.
But for Santana, it was intensified by this cultural displacement.
Yeah.
He was caught between two worlds.
Wow.
His Mexican heritage and his new American reality.
Right.
And music became his outlet,
Yeah.
his way of navigating that complex identity.
You can really hear that in his music.
Absolutely.
He was incorporating Latin rhythms, blues, rock, jazz.
It's all in there.
It's like he was creating a sonic tapestry
Yeah.
that reflected his own personal journey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His music wasn't just about entertainment.
No.
It was a reflection of his cultural fusion, his search for belonging.
Right.
And that's part of what made it so groundbreaking.
Yeah, I can see that.
He was breaking down musical barriers.
Yeah.
At the same time, he was breaking down cultural barriers.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Woodstock.
Oh, yeah.
That performance was legendary.
It really was.
And it really launched him into superstardom.
Right.
The source reminds us that Bill Graham
Okay.
was the one who championed Santana,
Okay.
who fought for them to be on that stage.
Really?
What do you think Graham saw in him?
Well, I think Graham, being the visionary that he was,
Yeah.
recognized the raw talent, the energy,
Mm-hmm.
the way Santana's music could connect with people from all walks of life. Remember, Woodstock was all about peace, love, and unity.
Yeah, for sure.
And Santana's music embodied that spirit perfectly.
It really did.
Yeah.
There's a passage in the source where Santana describes seeing that massive crowd
Yo.
from a helicopter.
Yeah.
He called it an ocean of hair and teeth and arms.
Oh my gosh, I can only imagine.
From busking on the streets
Mm.
to performing in front of 500,000 people.
Wow.
It's hard to fathom that kind of trajectory.
Yeah, and it solidified his place in music history.
Absolutely.
Woodstock was a defining moment for so many artists.
Yeah.
But for Santana, it was a true coronation.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But then, as we mentioned before,
Right.
the industry pressures, the creative clashes,
Right.
it took its toll.
Yeah, it did.
Do you think that period
Mm-hmm.
when he was dropped by Columbia
Right.
and struggling to get a record deal
Yeah.
was actually a blessing in disguise?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it must have been incredibly difficult for him to face those setbacks.
Yeah, of course.
To feel like the industry had turned its back on him.
Yeah, I can see that.
But on the other hand, it forced him to confront some inner demons,
Oh,
to
interesting.
reevaluate his path.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, I think it led him to Supernatural,
Well, good point.
which wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Right.
Sometimes hitting rock bottom is
Yeah.
what you need to rise again stronger than ever.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that his comeback wasn't just about the music.
Right.
He was dealing with the loss of his father,
Yeah.
the breakdown of his marriage,
Mm-hmm.
his own struggles with mental health.
Of course.
To come out of all that
Yeah.
and create something as powerful and successful as Supernatural,
It's incredible.
it's incredibly inspiring.